Welcome to the Covert Narcissism podcast. I'm your host, Renee Swanson. I am not a therapist, and you are not a victim. Today's episode is a little bit different and incredibly powerful. I'm joined by Todd Rennebohm. He's the host of the Bunny Hugs and Mental Health podcast. This is a raw and honest conversation about the messy intersection of addiction, trauma, ADHD, and narcissistic traits. Todd shares what it was like to live in survival mode and how addiction shaped his behavior and what changed when he finally got the help that he needed. We talk about what's really going on when someone seems narcissistic or shows narcissistic traits, but might actually be struggling to regulate or to cope or to feel safe in this world. This one's for anyone who's ever wondered, is it narcissism or something else? Let's dive in.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about your story.
Sure. Yeah. I kind of suffered through some addiction since I was in high school. And later in my 20s and 30s, I was having lots of anxiety and depression issues on top of the addiction ish. I don't know if I had an addiction then, but let's just say I liked alcohol and weed. And then, eventually it turned into a suicide attempt and, constant suicidal thoughts. And eventually I did have to spend some time in a psych ward. And then eventually a treatment center. So once I got sober, it was kind of like, that's when I was able to, I don't know, I had a strong enough base to then keep moving forward with my proactive, I don't know, healthiness, I guess.
Good.
So, yeah, I mean, it's been a long journey. And then about 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD, which put even more things into perspective. And and during COVID, I started the podcast and stuff. And I've learned probably more doing the podcast than I maybe could in a university class. I say that because I've never been to a university class.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. But I do understand that. Like, I have learned so much through podcasting and the research that you put into everything and the people that I get to talk to. So,
Yeah.
so do you think that the addictions or the addictive behaviors were they coping skills for trying to just cope with life or stress, that kind of thing?
Yeah. The more I've learned about ADHD and neurodivergent people, like being undiagnosed for so long, because I was 45 years old once I was diagnosed, that things like addiction can, or I mean, a lot of people undiagnosed do suffer with addiction. And when I was in addiction, like now I can, look back and I've talked to people who, like I said, are narcissistic. And I related with a lot of what they were saying in a way, because in a way, I feel like substance abuse disorder could almost be a cluster B personality disorder too, because there's so much overlap. And I mean, all the cluster Bs there's a lot of overlap with traits and personalities and stuff, but and they're all treatable too. So, I mean, with addiction, I was treated and, I can also relapse at any point. So I often wonder if people with maybe are diagnosed narcissistic, or maybe spouses or people in their life claim they are with someone who's narcissistic, but they're actually with someone who's just suffering with addiction or maybe undiagnosed ADHD or something. And yeah, they're just really bad coping skills, and it comes out looking like narcissism.
Narcissistic, yeah, that's a great question, and one that I do get asked often in my, my Facebook group that I run. It is a conversation that does come up quite a bit, and I totally get what people are saying with, how do I know this is narcissism and not alcoholism, or how do I know this is, narcissism and not somebody on the spectrum? These kind of questions do get presented a lot. And so I want to explore that with you a little bit. because you've lived down this path, and I have not. I cannot relate to that, but so I love the conversation.
You're perfect.
But yeah, no, yes, of course, no, but with all of us having narcissistic traits, like I've said so many times,
Mhm.
the difference is what I've always said is somebody who is narcissistic, they can't self-reflect and they can't see it in themselves. So you
Mhm.
might have somebody who's narcissistic and alcoholic. Okay, you
Right.
might have an overlap there, but when the alcoholism gets treated, okay, when they get some better coping skills and they get kind of past that. I mean, I once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, but there are better ways of coping with that, and people work through that. Okay, great. But does that then cause the narcissistic traits to go away?
Mm.
And
Gotcha.
that's a question that often comes up because a narcissistic person is they have these coping skills that are put up in place because they cannot handle the vulnerability of life. Okay. And so they have coping skills put in place. Now, those coping skills are your addictions. That's going to be whether it's an alcohol addiction, a sex addiction, it could be a work addiction, it could be a church addiction, it could be a relationship. The relationships are very addictive, and when you're dealing with a narcissistic person. But the addictions are not the problem, they're a side effect. They escalate the problem. There's no doubt about that. But they're a
Right.
side effect of somebody that has the narcissistic approach to life.
Mm.
And so there is a separation there. Just because somebody is alcoholic does not mean they're narcissistic. And
Right.
just because somebody is narcissistic does not mean they're an alcoholic.
Right. So, I guess it would be hard to tell if someone is narcissistic until they treat their addictions, and then if they're still having those traits, then you're like, oh, okay.
Then, I mean, that's one way to look at it, yes, because I would be curious to find out from you. You said that you were seeing narcissistic behaviors in yourself when you're kind of reflecting back, and
Mhm.
now that you're in the situation where you have, treated the alcoholism or the addictions that you were facing, and then let's even separate here in a little bit the ADHD piece that you bring up because that's another interesting aspect to all of this. Um, in that process of growth then, I would assume that comes from getting the help that you needed, do you still see the narcissistic traits or do you still see them to the extent that they were? Are you better able to reflect on them and be vulnerable?
Yeah, I'm better able to reflect. Um, well, I'm just much more self-aware in general. Um, I'm my I'm much more um regulated, like emotionally regulated, and much more apt to like get feedback or have
Mhm.
someone say, "Hey, I think maybe you should be doing this. I don't think what you're doing is so healthy." And then I go, "Oh, right, right. What have I changed in my routine that's not working?" Um, so yeah, I don't feel like I never thought I was maybe narcissistic, but looking back, it's like I could see how people could confuse me back then of maybe having narcissism, but
So some of the traits you saw would potentially have lined up. And
right,
that's where
right,
I'm saying the difference is that
right.
while the traits may be there, we all have narcissistic traits.
Hmm.
It doesn't
Hmm.
mean we all have narcissism.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I was manipulative. I was all types of things. I was, you know, uh, fight, flight, freeze mode all the time, and I
Mhm.
didn't care who, was hurt when I was doing it. And of course, usually it's the people I love the most that kind of get the brunt of it. So, um, and doing the 12 steps and stuff helped me realize all that stuff. And yeah, so no, I mean, I knew I was a decent person. I just was not being a decent person during
Well,
that
it
time.
sounds like that and this is not unusual. This is where we say there is this thing called adaptive narcissism, where narcissistic traits do show up, but it's our coping skills while we're trying to figure out who we are. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when does this show up? It often shows up in the teenage years. It often shows up in the young adult years. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people, you're going to see some form of narcissism development between the ages of 18 and let's say like 28. Okay. Somewhere in that range. Because again, we're living in a world where we don't feel safe. We don't feel like we can handle life. Adulting is scary. Okay. We're jumping into this world where now we've got to be responsible for life and we don't have good coping skills. A lot of us come from backgrounds where we weren't taught how to handle the stress of life. We weren't taught how to emotionally regulate. We weren't taught that it's okay to be less than perfect. Okay, we weren't taught these things. So we dive into life trying to be perfect, trying to make sure that everybody likes us, or make sure that we've got the best job, or make sure that whatever, that we're laying out the picture perfect of life.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't do that. I mean, that's not possible. And so instead, we put coping skills in place. And those coping skills present a lot of times as narcissism. They're the hypersensitivity, the defensiveness, the passing the blame, but that's not my fault. That was their fault. And so we have these coping mechanisms that come into place.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean we don't care. It doesn't mean we don't have compassion. It doesn't mean we don't have empathy. But the higher level of interacting with people, those develop once we start to drop the narcissistic traits. And then
Right.
we can develop and expand and grow and learn in our compassion and empathy for those around us.
Right. Right. Yeah. Now that you're saying that, even before I think addiction was an issue, I mean, I look back, I've been with my wife since we've been together 26 years or something. And I think back to our earlier relationship when you're just trying to figure out, let alone yourself, you're trying to figure out this relationship. And I'm sure even then I was, both of us were probably having these narcissistic things when in reality we were just growing up, really.
Mhm.
I mean, you think of growing up as a kid, but like really
No,
you
these are
grow.
growing pains. These are real
Yeah.
growing pains.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's no wonder there's so many like divorces and stuff in their 20s and early 30s, and it's, um, because some people just don't grow up while
Right.
the other spouse does, and I'm
Right.
very lucky that my wife stuck it all out and we grew up together basically. I mean, it came
That's awesome.
close. It came
Okay.
close, but
Yeah.
and also like in my family, especially with men, there's a lot of anger issues, and I mean, I guess that's emotional dysregulation as
It
well,
is.
and it's also well, I saw a meme a while ago that said anger is anxiety's bodyguard, and that's exactly what I think of when I think of the men in my family. It's like that comes out as anger, and not necessarily at another person. Sometimes it's just you're working on something that this goddamn thing won't fit in the hole, and next thing you know, you're smashing stuff and throwing hammers, and it's scary. And um, I don't know if that's a part of narcissism is emotional
Well,
dysregulation.
it's emotional dysregulation, absolutely. And the way it comes out as narcissism then is the person in the room who is now feeling unsafe because of this angry reaction. When this person then tries to reestablish safety, the other person, the one who's thrown the hammer, if they can own it and say, "Look, I just got mad about the hammer. All is good," and they can reestablish this sense of safety, that's one thing. Okay, that is not a narcissistic defensiveness. But if the person in the room, be it a spouse or a child of this person, if they speak up and say, "Hey, I didn't feel safe with that environment. It really bothered me that you got so angry." If the response is, "Well, I didn't get that angry," or, "Well, you need to learn to get over it," and it's passing the blame, or it's defending themselves, or it's gaslighting, okay, heaven
Mm.
forbid, "I didn't throw a hammer. What are you talking about?" It's
Or
those kind of
minimizing
do what?
or minimizing.
Yes,
Yeah,
minimizing it. That wasn't that big of
yeah,
a deal, it's just a hammer. You should see what my dad used to throw, you know.
right.
Any of those types of responses, that's the narcissism that's coming out. So it's not about, Emotional dysregulation, yes, but emotional dysregulation, you can be emotionally dysregulated and still not be narcissistic.
Right.
You can still be working on learning how to handle anger, how to put in coping skills. All of this still doesn't mean you're a narcissist. The narcissism comes out when you defend it, minimize it, invalidate it, blame it on something else when you can't own it.
Uh-huh. So taking absolutely no, uh, uh, not credit. Oh my,
No
I always have.
responsibility.
Yeah. There's a word I'm
Yeah,
thinking of. I can
accountability.
never. That's the word.
That's the word
Accountability.
you're looking for.
I can
Yeah,
never remember that word for some reason.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, and I mean, going through everything I've gone through through addiction treatment and everything, um, life is like so much easier to live than trying to constantly defend myself and do all those things that just perpetuate. It's like being humble is actually way easier than not.
I agree with that. It's really not that hard to be nice and humble and not perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to transform yourself from not being humble to being more humble. But once you are humble, it is like, okay, why was I resisting this for so long? This is like,
I love to hear you say that. Yeah, no, I love that you say that. And so what happens then in that growth that you just voiced, the coping skills of the addictions, you don't need them anymore.
right. Yeah.
And so the addictions kind of
They didn't
fall by
serve
the
me.
wayside because they're not necessary anymore.
Right. Yeah. They're no longer serving the purpose that for whatever reason they were there for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because yeah, you
Yeah.
were going through life with your guard up of, it's like we're walking through life with our hands up all the time going, I got to defend myself against this and that person. And what do they think? And that person said that about me. And all of this, everything is related to me. We think that the world is thinking about us far more than they actually are. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's that growth, that period of time where we're trying to go from childhood into adulthood. And as we get into adulthood, if we have a growth mindset, okay, not a I'm stuck, this fixed mindset that we see in narcissistic people, a
Is it a
growth
victim?
the what?
Is it kind of a victim mindset?
A victim mindset can absolutely be part of it. Yes, a victim, perfect, superior, all of the narcissistic mentality can show up as a very superior, I'm better than the world, or the victim of nobody understands me, everybody hates me, I'm gonna go eat some worms. Okay.
Mm.
And so we have both sides of that show up as narcissism. But if you have this growth mindset, then you start to recognize that, okay, not everybody's thinking about me all the time. And that person talking to me this way might have more to do with their background than it does with who I am. And
Mhm.
so maybe I'm not as judgmental of their words because, hey, maybe there's something going on in their world that causes them to be reacting to me this way. And so it becomes where we're no longer just so focused on how people are treating us. That's a growth that takes you past that says, I'm not that's not a narcissistic person. While they might have had narcissistic traits, they are growing past that. That's that emotional growth that narcissistic people don't do.
Uh, can they learn to do that?
So they can they can learn to mimic it. They
Mm.
can learn what they're supposed to say, what they're supposed to do. It can be a learned behavior. But if they do not get vulnerable,
Keep
and
going.
but if they do not get vulnerable and self-reflective, then they cannot actually grow past this. It will still be learned behavior. So
Okay.
it's like an alcoholic. If you've got an
Right.
alcoholic who I can learn that I'm not supposed to touch that alcohol, so I'm not going to do it. I can learn that I'm not supposed to go to that bar, and so I can do it. I can learn what I'm supposed to do, but I don't go through the steps. Like you said, the 12 steps or whatever steps it is. It doesn't have to be that, but don't go through the steps of actually getting the help I need. I'm just learning what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
How successful is that going to be?
Right. We call them a dry drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
So
not they're not gonna ever actually change and get the help.
Right. Okay. Um, some of the people with cluster Bs that I've spoke with on the podcast, they've mentioned that this that their personality disorders are actually a defense mechanism, just like alcohol is,
Hmm.
and it's caused either through pain or trauma or a learned behavior from another narcissistic parent or whatever. So, in a way, do you feel that they are suffering as well? It's not just their
A- absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And I hate it for them. I do.
Hmm.
And I really hope and pray that they can get the help that they need. Just like an alcoholic, the dry drunk, I would hate it for them. Like this is their own coping mechanism is in the way of them getting the help. And that's how the narcissism shows up is their own coping mechanism is in the way of their own ability to get help. Because to get help, you have to be vulnerable. And one of
Right.
the pure signs of a narcissist is they cannot be vulnerable because they can't
Mm-hmm.
because that means that they would be possibly under attack and they already think that the world is out to get them. And so they can't drop that defense.
That sounds frustrating.
Yes. Yes, extremely. And for those around them who love them and care about them and are trying to get them help, want to stand by their side, want to see the help. They're there to genuinely love them. And when just like if do a what do they call it when you gather around to try to talk to an alcoholic? An intervention,
Um,
okay? Just like if you're trying to have
yeah,
an
there you go.
intervention and the person won't listen, they won't hear it. That's frustrating, but until that
Yeah,
person decides they really want the help, there's not anything you really that you can do. You can try, but you can't really help them unless they really want it.
right. Um, yeah, and then you talk about covert narcissism. So, what's the difference between covert narcissism and regular narcissism?
And regular narcissism, yes. So overt
Overt. There you
narcissism,
go.
overt is the other one. Yeah, it's grandiose. It's also called, and covert is also called vulnerable narcissism. The words are used interchangeably, although they're not necessarily exactly right. But for our purposes, overt narcissism is more in your face.
Mm,
This is, the
mm,
whole world around them sees the narcissism too. It's, I'm great and wonderful. I'm going to dominate conversations. I'm the life of the party. Everybody wants to look at me. Everybody's jealous of my life and how great I am. And so this is very bold and in your face. It's definitely very, very presentable in the world and very obvious. Okay.
right. Okay.
So the covert side, however, is behind closed doors and presents as this person can present as really a great member of society. They can appear to be very giving. They can be, um, um, they're donating to the charities. They're giving of their time. They are the coaches of the little league soccer teams. They don't present like a narcissistic person.
Mm,
Okay, but behind closed doors, in their inner world with the people around them, you're gonna get the arrogance, the entitlement, the superiority, I'm better than everyone else, but it's gonna come out as, well, why can't you, understand what I'm saying? Because, clearly I'm using real words here, and what's wrong with you? And so you get these very dismissive comments, very invalidating comments, very passive aggressive. Okay. But it's not seen by the world. It's only at home. And a massive victim mentality, okay, is part of this covert world. So where a overt narcissist is the life of the party, the covert narcissist is the Eeyore of the world.
mm,
Okay. Everything you've ever done hurts me. I can't believe you would talk to me that way, that you would say it this way, that you would do that. And then when you try to come back to them and go, "Hey, I'm sorry that I said it that way," instead of giving you space for that, where they go, "Okay, let's grow together and let's learn together," and all of that. Instead, what you get is, "Well, I'm used to it because you always do that."
mm.
That's a very dismissive comment of a person trying to come and genuinely reconcile.
Right. Right.
And so
Hmm.
that's the more covert piece of it.
And then as a loved one of that covert narcissist, I suppose it's incredibly difficult um, to find any empathy or from anyone else because no one else sees it except them.
Absolutely. It's
Wow.
very isolating. You live in a very isolated world and
Controlled.
very controlled. Yes, very manipulated. You're making your checklist of, oh, I'll never say it that way again. I'll never do it this way again. I'll never bring that topic up again. So you've got this never never list going on. And by the time you're 20 years into this marriage, there's a Grand Canyon between you. There's no, because you've never reconciled anything.
Mm,
And so there's this massive void where there should be a connection. 20 years into a marriage, I mean, you said it yourself, you're 26 years into a marriage, and the growth that has happened, that has caused you guys to connect and like magnets, you've been able to bond. That
mhm.
doesn't happen when you're in a marriage with a covert narcissist. It's the opposite, like polar opposite ends of a magnet pushing each other away.
Ah. How often is it that two covert narcissists are in a relationship together? Or is it always,
I don't know.
one's kind of like has to be more passive and
Yeah, I don't know an answer to that. I can imagine that would be a very, very difficult environment. But with a covert narcissist, they tend to gravitate towards people who are fixers.
right.
And so they become like magnets to each other. And somebody who's got a fix it mentality, not necessarily growth oriented like what I'm talking about, can be, but somebody who's very, very interested in caring for other people's needs. And you've got a covert narcissist who's completely uninterested in caring about anybody's needs but their own. Those two tend to gravitate towards
So
each
they
other.
become codependent of each other in a way.
Yes, it becomes an addictive relationship. That's where I talk
Mm,
about the addictiveness. The covert narcissist is addicted to all of the energy, the mental and emotional energy that this partner is pouring into them. The partner is addicted to the moments of gratitude, the moments of we would call it breadcrumbing, the moments of praise that they get, the moments of approval that they get from this person who is otherwise difficult. So it's like a therapy project is what it, people talk about, is I feel like I became their therapist. Right, I get that, because that was how you were getting fed from the relationship, is when you got those moments of, they call it intermittent reinforcement. Okay, those moments of good behavior where you thought, okay, good, we're making progress. We're making, this is hope in our relationship.
mm,
And you become
mhm.
addicted to that.
Sounds terrible. So like
I mean,
both
it
people are
definitely can cause a lot of problems.
yeah, both people are craving something that they didn't have and they finding it in the other person, but all it's doing is just perpetuating and making things like no one's
It does.
getting, like you said, no one's growing and no one's getting better. They're just spinning their tires and then
They
having
are. It's
kids.
we talk about it like being on a hamster wheel. You're just spinning on a
Mm,
hamster wheel, or you're going through life and you're really in quicksand. Every move you make, you just sink a little deeper. But yes, it's really confusing for the kids, and the cognitive dissonance that gets formed is where the kids believe mom and dad love me, but they sure don't feel loved. They don't feel cared for. So their feelings and their thoughts don't line up. They don't match. Their thoughts and feelings are in battle with each other then, which really escalates then as they move into adulthood, where, let's go back to what we were talking about, where you're now moving from childhood into adulthood and you're trying to adult. You're trying to figure out life. You're trying to figure out, who am I? And look at your background, which is your thoughts and your feelings are in battle with each other, and now you're trying to move into adulthood. So you're going to see a whole lot of coping skills, coping mechanisms that develop there. And that's going to be your addictions. It's going to be, disassociation from life. It's going to be your suicidal ideation. All of these different things are going to start to show up there because you're taking such a broken, that internal battle, and you're trying to move this into adulthood.
mhm. I have a friend. I mean, his mother's not diagnosed, but he definitely thinks his mother especially, is uh, narcissistic, and he's an only child. and like no one else. It sounds like a lot of the family's pretty screwy. To be honest with you,
It's
and
usually like, yes, it's usually a tornado. It's like somebody dropped a tornado in the middle of the family unit and they all got spun. Thank you so much for joining us on the Covert Narcissism podcast. I wish you so much peace on your journey of healing. You have been listening to the Covert Narcissism podcast, where we break apart the insidious nature of these incredibly destructive and frustrating to the ends of the earth individuals. If you are struggling with the isolation, overwhelming self doubt, and obsessive ruminating, you are not alone. I offer live, personalized coaching that is specific for you. This coaching can be individual or group sessions, or a combination of the two. You can find all the information at covertnarcissism.com. Reach out anytime. My email address is Renee, Renee, at covertnarcissism.com. And remember, I am not a therapist and you are not a victim, but I am a coach and you are a survivor. The information provided by Renee Swanson, Covert Narcissism Podcast, and CNG Life Coaching is for educational purposes only and is not to be used for diagnosis purposes. It is not intended to be a substitute for clinical care. Please consult a health care provider for guidance specific to your case. This material discusses narcissism in general. Renee shares stories from her personal experience as well as from those she has talked with for several years. Her material does not claim that any specific person has narcissism and should not be used to refer to any specific person as having narcissism. Permission is not granted to link to or repost this material to support any allegation or claim that any specific person is a narcissist. That would be an unauthorized misuse of the material and information provided.